Welcome to the EQ Fit podcast. Our mission is to equip people to prosper in every aspect of their life. Whether you're at home or in the workplace, we explore practical ways of improving success, satisfaction, finding balance, and building enjoyable and beneficial relationships. Thank you for joining us. Today we're going to continue our focus on very specific competencies of emotional intelligence. And the one we're going to focus on today is called apply consequential thinking. So if you just took those words, apply consequential thinking, what would that mean to you? Well, obviously the word consequences is in there, so we would think something that had to do with consequences. But how do you apply that in a thinking process? That's what we're going to talk about today. This is another skill of emotional intelligence measured through an emotional intelligence assessment. And it's a skill that's going to help us understand a lot of our higher cognitive processes. How do we think better? And what is the environment we need in our brain to be thinking better and making better decisions? Because there's a lot of impact in our brain from our emotional input, the limbic system of the brain kicking in and generating emotions that are sending our brain messages. How do we deal with all of that? Well, that's where these competencies come in. So I'm using, again, the 6 seconds model of emotional intelligence. That's where this specific competency of apply consequential thinking comes from. And it's really very important as a basis for effectively managing our emotions and engaging with other people. This competency emphasizes the importance of evaluating the costs and benefits of your choices when you're making a decision. It involves thinking through the potential outcomes. There's where consequences come in. Thinking through the potential outcomes of your actions before you proceed. Doesn't do a lot of good to apply consequential thinking after you have decided and acted. That's kind of that may be reflecting. It's not really applying consequential thinking, because once you do that, the consequences are in motion, so to speak. This skill, this competency is crucial, both in personal and professional areas of our lives. Now, I'm looking at a description that 6 Seconds has put out about this. And again, if you want to check them out, it's very simple. It's the number 6, the word seconds, seconds.org. So feel free to check them out. Tons of good resources there, wonderful assessments. I use just about every assessment that they have. So let's talk about this apply consequential thinking and what they're trying to get across here. Their definition is evaluating the costs and benefits of your choices. And we've talked about that. So why is it important, though? This skill helps you assess your decisions and their effects. It is key to managing your impulses and acting intentionally rather than just reacting. That's an important point. If you find yourself reacting a lot, you may be getting a lot of consequences that you really don't want, or a lot of outcomes that you really don't like or don't want. So it's a difference between reacting and taking a little more time, using a skill like apply consequential thinking, and responding in a more intentional manner. And this is important in every part of life. So it's a process of analyzing and reflecting using both thoughts and feelings. This is where you combine the rational and the emotional parts of your brain, the input that you're getting from different parts of your brain to make your best decisions, and really to identify the response that is going to be optimal for yourself and for other people, because your decisions, your actions don't just impact you. This competence is critical for making a strategic plan that accounts for the human dynamics and for managing your own behavior as you execute that plan. Now, what happens if you have a low, very low rating on applied consequential thinking? Does not account for impact of choices, may not recognize he or she is making choices, may be impulsive, and that may be for good or for ill. I mean, it may work out or it may not. But what happens if you're on the really high side in rating that competency of applied consequential thinking? Thoughtful and careful, looks both at short and long term, weighs decisions with feelings and thinking together, could become unspontaneous or even calculating, especially if the empathy of that person is low. So it's interesting that on both extremes, there are some potential downsides. And that's why we have to think about that. When I talk to people about having a very, very high rating on their applied consequential thinking competency, what I say to them is, if I see a very high rating, I say something like, do you find yourself going over the same situation in your mind over and over and over and over? And a lot of the time they answer yes. Well, we've now moved from applying consequential thinking, which is running kind of what if scenarios in your head, looking for different options and trying to figure out which one has the best outcome. It's moved from that to what I call ruminating, where we just get stuck and cycle by going over the same thing over and over and over. So it's important to think about what these ratings mean. And when we talk about the impact of these higher, lower kinds of ratings on this, it's really important to focus in on what are the downsides, what are the upsides, depending on where your measure in that competency is. Let's start with the downsides. What is the impact of a low applied consequential thinking score? Well, a low score can have significant negative impacts on somebody's life and their career. Without this competency developed to a reasonable level, decisions may be made impulsively without considering the long-term effects or the broader impacts on yourself or on other people. Now, what could that lead to? Let's go ahead and play that out. Number one, poor decision making. Decisions made without weighing consequences can lead to negative outcomes that could have been avoided. And that's the key phrase. With consequential thinking, negative outcomes could be avoided. You could have strained relationships. Impulsive decisions can affect others negatively, leading to damaged relationships, both personally and professionally. You could have increased stress and anxiety, failing to consider the full implications of actions, because that's the process. You have a thought, you attach meaning to that thought, then emotions are generated out of that, and then you make a decision and take an action. That is the standard flow of the way our brains work. So failing to consider the full implications of our actions can result in unexpected negative consequences, which of course can increase stress and anxiety. Career setbacks. In a professional setting, impulsive decision making can lead to poor judgment calls, affecting one's reputation and somebody's opportunities for advancement. I can tell you, having done organizational development for more than 35 years, coaching hundreds and hundreds of people one on one, and just working with organizations to build teams and to develop leadership pipelines. This right here is critical. How impulsive a person is versus how thoughtful they are, in many ways, can determine their trajectory in their career within any kind of an organization. So these are important skills we're talking about. These are not nice to have things, these are must have skills. So, what are the benefits then of developing this competency of applied consequential thinking to a fairly strong level? Well, enhancing this competency can provide better decision making skills. So that makes sense. With strong consequential thinking, people can make more informed and well considered decisions. You can improve relationships. Considering how decisions impact other people, you can maintain healthier relationships. And I think we've all experienced something like that when we have just reacted or lashed out at somebody. It never turns out well. It never has, it might feel good for a second, but it really never has the intended outcome that we would like it to have. And there are better ways to relate to other people, to build trust. Trust suffers when people are impulsive and when they don't think through their decisions and the actions that they take. You can get greater personal and professional success by developing this skill. Thoughtful decision making leads to more effective problem solving, and that helps with goal achievement. You can also reduce the amount of regret. Now, I also would term that emotional load. How much emotional load is somebody carrying? The heavier that load, the less able that individual is to move forward, to access higher thinking skills, to have more success and satisfaction in life. So, by anticipating the outcomes of our action by using applied consequential thinking, you're less likely to regret your decisions. Therefore, you're less likely to be carrying a heavier emotional load. Let's focus now on how to grow applied consequential thinking as a competency and a skill. And I know I use those terms interchangeably. The competency is the measure. How much of something do you have? Is it low? Is it medium? Is it high? The skill is putting it into practice. And really, there are two parts to all of these competencies I'm talking about. What is the measure of it that you have? But then also, how are you putting it into practice? Well, let's talk about how to grow that skill, that competency measure. It involves a few strategic approaches and practical exercises we can put in place. The first one, and I think this is a great one to start with, pause before you act. So cultivate the habit of pausing to consider the potential consequences of your choices. This simple pause can shift you from a reactive to a reflective state of mind, enabling better decisions. And, it's funny, it goes back to that old saying, count to 10 when you're mad. There's real science behind that. If you think about when somebody angers you or irritates you and really gets under your skin, if you immediately react, it will most likely not be the optimal response that gets you the optimal outcome. It's just harder to think clearly. when you have a very strong emotion or set of emotions present that are directly impacting and maybe limiting your higher thinking processes. And by the way, just a side note on that, there are people out there, believe it or not, there are people out there who like to manipulate other people. And they find that if they can make somebody angry, that other person is easier to manipulate. Now, I don't know about you, but I've experienced that in my life. But I've also created really strong skills, EQ skills, to deal with those emotions when they happen. Am I perfect at it? No, I'm not. But I'm a lot better at it than I used to be, especially when I was in my teens and in my 20s. So be thoughtful about these skills. Not only are they there for you to achieve more, be more successful, and be more satisfied in your life, they're also there to help you navigate difficult situations where it may be a highly emotionally charged situation that you're dealing with. And if you have a strong set of these emotional intelligence skills in place, then you have a much better opportunity to deal with them in a way that gets you a better outcome and other people as well. So, the first one is pause before acting. The next one is pros and cons analysis. So, this is kind of that what if scenario that I talked about. Regularly practice making pros and cons lists for your decisions, especially important ones. I think that's a really good idea. Now, whether you make that list in your brain or whether you sit down and write it out, it depends on who you are and what your best style is of working through those things. I do recommend for some people to write those things out. What are the pros and cons? And this is especially important if you're making a major decision in your life, a career change, buying a house, buying a car, having children. There's so many different significant decisions in our lives that our emotions can hijack us if we don't have a good way to navigate those emotions, which, by the way, will be the next episode that we'll do, talking about navigating emotions. So, if you do this pros and cons analysis, it's going to help visualize the potential benefits and drawbacks of each of those options. I don't know about you, but I always like to have options when I'm making a decision of any kind of importance. So, what's the next approach we can take to grow, apply consequential thinking? Seek feedback. Regularly consult with others to get different perspectives on possible outcomes. See what other people think about how to approach a certain decision or something of importance and maybe it affects them as well. This can broaden your understanding of the potential impacts of your decisions. And if you're going to make decisions, let's say you're a leader in a business and you're going to make decisions that directly impact your team or your people, it isn't that bad of an idea to elicit their feedback and figure out what they're thinking. Now, I'm not saying you're making a decision by committee because that doesn't work very well. What I'm saying is if people are going to be impacted by the decisions you make, there may be times when you want to include them in that process. Here's another way that you can grow that skill. Reflect on your past decisions. Reflect on past decisions and their outcomes. Consider what would you do differently and what did you learn? I absolutely love this practice and I use it all the time for myself. When I can go back and think about decisions I've made in the past, what was the outcome and what could I have changed to get a better outcome? And frankly, what could I have changed that maybe I wouldn't have as much regret or as much uncertainty or concern as I did at the time? The other side of that is, what did you learn? And one of the key areas that really ignites learning within us is when we make a mistake or don't make the best decision. Do we look at that as a learning opportunity, or do we look at that as something else? Like, oh, I'm just going to avoid that. I'm not even going to think about that. I hated that. It was stupid. I wish I'd never done it. Well, I appreciate those feelings, but it's not very helpful. Number one, stop beating yourself up. Number two, leverage that. There's energy there. Leverage that to help you make better decisions in the future. Here's something else you can do: scenario planning. What in the world is scenario planning? Well, engage in scenario planning where you imagine various outcomes of a decision. It's kind of taking it that next step. Don't just think of what are the possible outcomes and consequences. Live it out a little bit in your mind. This helps in preparing for different possibilities and understanding the potential impacts more clearly. Some of us, me included, are very visual people. I like to see charts and graphs. I like to see visuals. I like colors. So I do this for myself. I project myself into a given decision action process to identify what that is actually going to look like and feel like for myself and others if I go down that decision pathway. You can do the same thing for yourself. And the last one I'll share with you is mindfulness and emotional awareness. And again, mindfulness is not some new age crazy thing it could be made into that, I guess. Mindfulness is literally developing a skill of being able to consider and reflect on what's going on in your head. What is your rational environment? What is your emotional environment? What is the overall environment, your mindset that is going on? That's going to help you get a better sense of, am I in a good place to make a good decision or not? There are certain times I will not make an important decision. If I'm under heavy emotional load, a lot of stress, anything like that, I try to withhold making a critical decision in those times. So basically, do you know what I'm doing? I'm applying consequential thinking to whether I'm going to make a decision or not. And I know that if I'm in a specific state of mind, there are times when I should not make a decision. Let's finish this out with some very practical things that we can do. We've already talked about some ways to apply consequential thinking, competency, and skill. Let's talk about the practices we can put in place on a daily basis to help us grow that competency so we have greater skill to apply that. So here's something we can do. We can do daily reflection, and maybe that's a journal. It's funny, I used to tell people I will never journal anything in my entire life. Don't even talk to me about journaling. I hate it. I will not do it. And guess what I do today? And there's a reason for that. I have learned how important it is in habit formation when I'm trying to create better habits. I've learned how important it is in leadership to have something I can go back to and reflect on. I can track progress over time when I'm working on growing or developing certain skills. So maybe some form of a daily reflection journal, where you can note the decisions you made, why you made those decisions, and what the outcomes were. You can reflect on those daily, weekly, whatever your rhythm is that makes sense to you. It's going to enhance, number one, your self awareness, which is absolutely critical. Without self awareness increasing, and by the way, self awareness is just not what's going on in my brain, it's how am I showing up for other people. That's a part of self awareness. The more you have self awareness, the greater it is for you, the better you're going to be able to navigate the different things that come at you in life and at work. And so being able to reflect on those enhances that awareness, but it also ignites more learning. It fosters and cultivates learning and growth, which is so important. The other thing or two that you can do, I've got a couple of more here. One is mentorship. Engage with a mentor who excels in decision making. Stop for a minute. I want you to think about the people in your life. And maybe they're people you've known in the past, or maybe they're people that you know and you stay in touch with now. I want you to think about the person that you believe is the best decision maker that you've ever known. Have you got that person in mind? Now, I want you to take that person, whether you know them and relate to them now, or whether that's somebody in the past. The first thing I want you to do is think about how they made decisions. Now, maybe you didn't talk about it, just outright with them on how they make decisions. I think that'd be a great thing to do with somebody. If you know somebody now who makes really good decisions, I would bet that there is a process that they use. There is a mindset that they put themselves in. So this is why mentoring is something we all need and want and should do for others in the future. This mentorship approach is relationship based that can provide us insight and feedback that is absolutely invaluable in developing our consequential thinking. And the last thing I'll talk about here, as far as just a regular practice, is training programs. Participate in workshops or training programs focused on strategic thinking and decision making. And there's a lot of thinking skills, by the way. There's abstract thinking, consequential thinking, strategic thinking, problem solving, decision making. There are so many different higher level thinking skills. But guess where they all generate from? From a very good mix of the rational and emotional parts of our brains coming together to help us make the very best decisions. I'm just getting ready to launch the Life Thrive Leadership Program. I've partnered with Dr. Chuck Coker. I think I've talked to you about this in a previous episodes. I want to talk about this for a minute because we have been doing this work for decades, both him and I. So between us, we've got some 75 plus years of doing individual development, personal development, professional development, spiritual development, organizational development. And there are some really important things that we've learned. Number one, that learning and development is a journey. It's not a destination. It's not something you do one time and you're done. It's not going to a seminar. Bottom line, you lose all kinds of learning, immediately. 10% is all you retain when you walk out the door of a seminar. That 10% is mostly gone in 2 weeks. Unless you just hang on to one thing that you just really wanted to put in place. So this is when we talk training programs, please don't just assume that they're all the same and that they're all really good and all of that. Find a program like ours, a little promotion here, but find a program like ours that is based in learning science, that really understands how the brain takes in information and learns and then practices it and reflects on it and grows in it. That training of your brain and growing your skill sets is so critical. And a lot of that is on you. It is, am I willing to take in the learning, engage with the learning? Am I willing to activate it, put it into practice? Am I willing to do my exercises, just like going to the gym? If you do those things, you will see the rewards. It happens. It is a consistent, positive impact on people's lives. Most people don't put in the energy and effort. I hope you're not one of those. I hope you're willing to invest in yourself. So let's close this out by looking at this apply consequential thinking competency. It really is a cornerstone of emotional intelligence, specifically what we call self-regulation, or what some call self-management. By developing this skill, people can achieve better outcomes in their personal and professional lives. The journey to enhancing this competency involves practice, reflection, and a commitment to personal growth. Through deliberate practice and strategic thinking, anyone can improve their ability to consider the consequences of their actions and make a more positively impactful decision more often. Thank you for joining us for this episode. If you have any questions about this week's episode, or maybe a suggestion for future episodes you'd like us to explore, please contact us through our website at eqfit.org. For more information and inspiration, connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube at EQFit.